We're going to move on now to Helen Young, who is sitting on my right. Helen is a research director at the Feinstein International Center at Tufts University, and she's currently leading the Tufts Sudan project on pastoralism, trade, and markets. It's part of the 5-year UNEP Sudan Integrated Environment Project. Helen has a background in food security and nutrition, and she first worked in Sudan in 1986. So both she and Margie have a very long history of working in Sudan. And she spent 2 years in El Fasher. She's published nearly 60 peer-reviewed articles, books, book chapters, and published reports, many of which relate to Sudan. So we're very happy to have Helen with us here today. And Helen's going to be talking about the market tracking system and what the initial results of that have been. Helen?
Thanks very much, Wendy. And I'd also just like to echo my thanks to ODI and the Humanitarian Policy Group for hosting this, because for us it's a really great opportunity, especially for the online live link. And I'd just like to say hello to all of you who are listening outside of this room. We really appreciate your presence, and please give us feedback after the event. Anyway, I'm going to be talking about some of the activities that complement and build upon these research studies in order to get the most out of the research and also to maximize the quality of the research. As has already been mentioned, these research projects are part of a wider project on livelihoods and environment under the UNEP Sudan Integrated Environment Project. And that's funded by UK aid from the Department of International Development. So we see UNEP very much as both a partner in this work and also as a key player in taking the work forward. I also want to share with you some of the recent experience in developing new approaches to dealing with many of the challenges of undertaking research in Sudan and also in researching pastoralists in general. We've been working in Sudan for more than a decade now, and in some ways, while it gets easier, it also gets much more difficult, and that's something I'd like to reflect upon. Now, our work, let's just work out how to do this. Sorry. I think it's this way.
Left and right.
There you go. Our work is a partnership. We should be accompanied here by several different organizations who are working with us, including national and international partners. We are only a very small team based in Khartoum. And as I said, we're working under the UNEP umbrella, and we have 3 very crucial national NGO partners, SOS Sahel Sudan, the Darfur Development and Reconstruction Agency, and El Massa Organization for the Development of Nomads. We also have 2 government partners. We have MOUs with the Ministry of Livestock, Fisheries and Range, and also with the Council for the Development of Nomads. Now, those MOUs are quite recent, but Tufts' history in Sudan working in the livestock sector goes back much longer than that and is associated with Rindapest. My colleagues in Ethiopia have been working on that. And of course, the other international organization is the International Institute for Environment and Development. Does that work? Yeah. So our current project on the pastoralism and pastoralist livelihoods component has 5 broad areas of activity, and 3 of those areas feed into and inform the research. So, for example, we started off with a stakeholder survey and analysis that was based on 600 interviews face-to-face and online, and that's helped us develop a stakeholder network that we can now link in with in Sudan. We've also commissioned 6 working papers, policy review papers, that have contributed to both the adaptation of our pastoralism policy options course that IIED is supporting, and it's also contributed to informing the research studies. Now, in addition to the research studies, we've also undertaken some programmatic reviews, particularly of livestock, livelihoods projects focusing on livestock, and that's linked with the the Livestock Emergency Guidelines and Standards. Now, the little green circles that you can see there in the diagram actually relate to networks or groups. So I mentioned this wider multi-stakeholder group that came out of the survey. We also have a national steering group who act as advisors to keep us on the right track and who can give us guidance and work with us as we work things out. And I'm glad to say that we have one of the members from that national steering group, or two of the members, with us in the audience, as well as a senior member, our technical expert of our adaptation team that is working on adapting the pastoralism policy course for Sudan. So welcome, and welcome those of you who are working with us in Sudan who are listening. Now, the last aspect I just want to mention briefly relates to dissemination and outreach. Now, for most researchers, dissemination and outreach is a luxury, but it's a luxury, I would argue, that we can ill afford to miss out, because this is what allows us to have meetings like this, but also nationally within Sudan to take the results back to North Kordofan, to Darfur, to share with our colleagues there. So just last week there was an event in El Obeid that was hosted by the ministry that actually brought some of the producers from the northern part of the state to participate along with senior members of the ministry to discuss the findings of the report Severio's been discussing. We've also had events in Addis Ababa and also Nairobi. We're planning some for the Arab states and also for Europe and the US. And the whole point of this is that it connects the work in Sudan, the international work, to the international debate, allowing the sharing of experience, the cross-fertilization of ideas, and of course that contributes to research praxis in Sudan. So this part of the work I think is really, really important. Now, we've heard that within Sudan, we've heard two current issues mentioned. One of them is the importance of livestock to the national economy and exports. And the other issue that's only been very briefly mentioned but has come up is the issues regarding the new international border and the cross-border mobility of livestock. The new international border extends for something like 2,000 kilometers, and the more than 15 groups that depend on their pastoralist production system on moving animals going into the south, and some groups spend up to 5 months in southern Sudan. Now, the policy response to these new economic and political realities is very mixed. The importance of livestock is widely recognized, and there is a national policy imperative which is a modernizing drive for development, but that goes hand in hand with the settlement of pastoralists. Now that contrasts with some more locally driven initiatives by local ministries to support livestock mobility, including opening corridors, even the reallocation of land used for mechanized farming to livestock pastures and livestock corridors. That's happening in Blue Nile. So there is a very diverse, mixed policy experience. What there does seem to be, let's move this on, is a lack of evidence for informing that policy in practice. So in terms of informing that debate, when we've reviewed the available literature that we have, it is fairly limited. And particularly, there is a dearth of hard evidence showing how the pastoralist system of production actually works on the ground, both in terms of the day-to-day management of pastoral herds, the access to available pastures, water and fodder. Even less do we know about how pastoralists deal with the wide-ranging obstacles, threats and opportunities in their way. It's already been mentioned, but the systems of local governance of some of these key resources, how they're managed on the ground. And all of these factors, of course, contribute to the resilience of the pastoralist system and livelihoods more broadly. And of course, also, they have implications for social relations, peace and security. So these aspects are very important. Oh, sorry, I missed. But in thinking about how we can do research in this way, or research on some of these topics, we encounter many problems. There's the challenges of undertaking research with a hard-to-reach group, a group that's poorly defined, often scattered, not necessarily visible. There's the problems of the protracted insecurity and conflict in many areas. Even regions like North Kordofan now are potentially difficult to undertake field research in. And of course, that doesn't just affect, it affects everybody, from the pastoralist producers, the research team, anyone who's in that region. And the final issue is the strained relations and mistrust between the national authorities and the international community. And that inevitably generates a degree of mistrust and suspicion that we have to work with to overcome. So the objectives for our second study, building on the work of Severio's earlier work, is to develop and pilot new methods and approaches to investigate pastoralist livestock mobility, and using those methods to monitor and appraise the utility or value of pastoralist livestock migrations, including the decision-making, the local adaptations, and the wider trends that are affecting it. And we've chosen 2 states, North Kordofan and East Darfur. Now, we have what we feel is a degree of methodological innovation, looking for new solutions for old and new problems. And basically, we've developed an interdisciplinary methodology that brings in new techniques with GPS tracking and monitoring of livestock mobility, but combined with standard approaches for social scientists in the areas of social anthropology and applied development, building on the work of anthropologists who've worked in Sudan in the past, people like Kunison, Tassal Assad. And we're also drawing on the past experience in Sudan of mapping livestock mobility, particularly amongst humanitarian and development organizations. And I just want to share a little bit of that because to contrast it with our more recent work. This is a diagram from a major, the first, I think, comprehensive pastoralism baseline survey that was done in Sudan by El Massar in 2003, where they mapped the 11 official stock routes. And this map shows you the routes that are in South Darfur, which is now obviously South and East Darfur, going into southern Sudan. This map shows you work that was done a year later, looking at those same routes, and the only point I want to pull out is that this work was done in 2004, so after the start of the Darfur conflict. And this study found that the northern limits of the livestock migrations, both for camel herders and cattle herders, had been brought much further south. So they were unable to access their northern preferred rainy season pastures. So in that past diagram, those livestock migratory routes, some of them extend 500 kilometers or more. Here we can see that a major part has been reduced. This next example is from a series of workshops by UNDP and FAO in 2010. And at these workshops, local participants did a socioeconomic mapping of the migratory routes and their characteristics. And I want to just point out that if you look at East Sudan, which is to the right of the picture, some of the routes are actually shaded in red. Basically, they were saying that these routes were completely blocked as a result of conflict-related events at that time, either because areas were under the control of rebels, or there were clashes between rebels and government forces, or there was tribal conflict. But for whatever reason, these routes were completely blocked, and this is how they were reported. Now, there are some limitations of this retrospective mapping. I only want to touch on a couple. One is, in all of these diagrams, we see straight lines. But from the work on the ground and the work of Severio and others, we know that the movement is not uniform. It's not moving in a smooth, continuous way. The other point is that many of the diagrams show livestock routes that tend to peter out in the middle of nowhere and don't go anywhere near the national border, the new national border, whereas, as I mentioned, we know that groups spend some time in the south. And lastly, there are vast rangelands in Darfur that are not crossed by these mapped routes. So how are pastoralists accessing those areas? So these are some of the questions that were raised that we wanted to address. The recent study, as I mentioned, applies mixed methods. Because of the importance of the seasonal dimension, the temporal dimension, what happens over a calendar year for a pastoralist, we wanted to capture the seasonal migration of livestock. And we've done that by recruiting 12 producer groups, 6 in East Darfur and 6 in North Kordofan. And we have recruited them to join a study for upwards of 3 months or more. And we're using GPS tracking devices to monitor their mobility, and we're complementing that by more standard methods, including weekly interviews with the herders by phone, or where the phone is cut off, we will have regular outreach visits, and also complementing those weekly interviews by regular outreach visits where more information is collected that's more qualitative. We also have regular visits from our National Monitoring Coordinator and Tufts researcher, where data is downloaded, there's any troubleshooting, and additional information is collected. I think I'm running out of time. So just a little bit about developing the devices. We basically had local collars made, and the actual devices were purpose-built by a company in Scotland, because after we undertook a review of the available equipment on the market, none suited our purpose, because we wanted an archival device. We did not want to be transmitting data for obvious reasons. So that's why we have to go regularly and download the device. The background study, we had a background study done for us by the Southampton Geodata Institute, who've done a lot of work in this area. Very important aspect, an introductory visit by senior members of the federal ministry to introduce the study to the state authorities. Very, very important, because we cannot make any assumptions about going ahead unless it has all the necessary approvals and the right people on board. The other aspect that's crucial is a process of informed consent, so that the producers know what they're letting themselves in for and they fully agree. And here we have a veterinarian explaining aspects of the study, and he will also do a health check on the animals during at the beginning and also as the study proceeds. Here is the data being downloaded. So it's inconspicuous, and these are very robust instruments that can withstand the conditions in South Sudan. I just, 2 more slides. I just want to say something about the importance to this work of the national and local level partnership. Tufts is one actor out of several, and probably in many ways the least important, because this work depends on the leadership of several different partner organizations. And I should also make reference here to one of our national colleagues from the University of Gadaref, who is the head of the remote sensing department there, whose technical expertise has also played a major role in helping us take this work forward. So the value of long-term partnerships, I think I've probably covered most of these points. It fosters demand-driven research, promotes interdisciplinary problem-solving approaches, and essentially what we see is a synergy between the multiple stakeholders. So far we've achieved 5 months of interviews, 3 months of GPS monitoring. We're in the middle of our analysis, and we're going to be writing up the pilot, well, we are near completion of the pilot at the moment. We would like to complete a full calendar year, and we would also like to complement this by a wider study that looks at the scale and coverage of these pastoralist migrations, because we have the in-depth vertical perspective. We would like to get a horizontal perspective to look at the relevance and importance of such livestock mobility across the country. And there's potential here, we think, maybe for crowdsourcing. Thank you.
Helen, thank you very much for that really interesting presentation. And I think emphasizing the role that your national and local partners in Sudan have played is a really important one, because often this is the case where people are doing the work on the ground but often don't get the credit for that or aren't recognized for the contribution they make. I don't want to talk too much myself, because we have only about 30 minutes left now for questions and comments from the audience. I did just want to say before we start that Helen and Zoe McCormack, her colleague, wrote an interesting article for us in an issue of the Humanitarian Exchange on South Sudan, number 57. And it's called Pastoralism in the New Borderlands, a Humanitarian Livelihoods Crisis. So Helen and Zoe talk about the issues related to the lack of mobility and other issues that have arisen since the division of the Sudans. So I urge you to read that.